Good morning, everybody. My name is Kenyatta Skiles, and I will be today's facilitator for the first episode of EYEJ Speaks. Over the next 8 weeks, EYEJ Speaks will feature engaging and empowering discussions on social justice and civic engagement issues that are derived from topics discussed in EYEJ's core program for youth with over 450 adult volunteers. The discussion series and online program, Youth Online Discussing Justice, also known as YODJ. We will bring together intergenerational leaders representing various backgrounds for the conversations. Over the course of the hour, we hope that you will leave with some tools you can bring back to your communities and organizations. Before we begin, EYEJ Speaks is an interactive forum for the community, and we want you to join in the discussion. While you are watching, be sure to ask questions, make comments, and use the hashtags EYEJ Speaks and social justice in the comments section below. Also, if you haven't done so already, be sure to follow us on Facebook, of course, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. Our handle is EYEJ Cleveland. Today's discussion will be on toxic stress. So we have a great panel of speakers who will have a greater and deeper discussion around the focus of toxic stress. We want you to leave this conversation today educated about toxic stress in youth and adults, how youth versus adults deal with toxic stress, the impact of the pandemic and recent headlining stories connected to increased toxic stress, and most importantly, solutions. Now that you've heard the conversation, what's next? But before we begin the program, I'd like to turn it over to founder and executive director of EYEJ, Ms. Mai Moore, to say a few words about the important work of EYEJ in amplifying youth voices and to set up today's conversation. Mai?
Thank you so much, Kenyatta. First of all, I would definitely like to thank Kenyatta for being the visionary for this new series, EYEJ Speaks, and definitely Mallory, who is one of our leads for our EYEJ Youth Council, and Habiba Grimes, who is definitely a visionary for EYEJ in regards to toxic stress, and she is definitely a leader here in Cleveland. She has been part of EYEJ almost from the beginning, part of our board, visionary of our social justice stance, and advisor, and I definitely respect her dearly. Also, I just want to know an extra special thanks to Kenyatta and Habiba for being here during these times. All of us are in pain, tired, exhausted, but specifically for Kenyatta and Habiba for being leaders, and I really appreciate them. Thank you to all those that are watching us. I hope that you enjoy these series and they inspire you for positive change. And just a little bit about EYEJ. It is a nonprofit located here in Cleveland, Ohio, where we are all about amplifying youth voices for those that are silent. We have served 1,500 underserved youth in 6.5 years, and we began because of the Trayvon Martin ruling out of Plymouth Church in Shaker Heights, Ohio. We are very focused on civil discourse, social emotional development, teaching youth to be advocates for change and life skills. And we do this through several programs that we have, including our staple program, our discussion series, our EYEJ Youth Council, and our newly formed programming that is online, which is YODJ, Youth Online Discussing Justice, and the All-Star Reading Program. I do want to mention that we do have an incredible giving campaign occurring right now that is called #Empower. And I am so grateful to the community. We have raised $79,000 with over 203 donors was the last update that I saw. We are trying to raise about $20,000 more, and that money does support our new online program that we had to quickly create because of COVID-19 and pivot and serve our youth. And then also our EYEJ Youth Council, they definitely need stipends for the summer as they are going to be doing some incredible work this summer. I do want to also thank the 47 people on the EYEJ team on the back end right now that are helping EYEJ grow and be innovative and out of the box at this time to help empower our youth. And today we are talking about toxic stress. The originator and vision of toxic stress was definitely Habiba. And I want to say that our EYEJ Youth Council about 2 years ago declared that it is definitely an epidemic here in Cleveland with our youth. And according to the Center for Youth Wellness, we have 34.8 million children that are affected by ACEs. And if you don't know what ACEs are, I'm sure Habiba will talk about it a little bit, but they are adverse childhood experiences that come from traumatic situations or experiences. So I'll hand it back over to you, Kenyatta.
Great, thank you. So again, we have a well-rounded and diverse panel of speakers today. We have, first off, Ms. Mai Moore, founder and executive director, of EYEJ, Empowering Youth, Exploring Justice. And again, Mai, thank you again for all of the work that you do and making this work possible and uplifting the voices of so many young people in Cleveland and hopefully taking this worldwide. We have Ms. Habiba Rashid Grimes, the CEO of Positive Education Program, also known as PEP, and advisor to EYEJ. So thank you, Habiba, for joining us this morning. Look forward to the great insight that you bring and hearing about all of the dynamic work that you are doing. And finally, we have Mallory Wilkes, a rising junior and photographer, also a member of the EYEJ Youth Council, advisor on the EYEJ Youth Council. So excited to hear your insights and hearing the youth perspective on this work, Mallory. So the conversation of toxic stress couldn't have come at a more, it couldn't have been more timely, ladies. You know, we are having this conversation against the backdrop of an unprecedented time in this country and around this world, being in the midst of a global pandemic with 1.82 million cases in the United States alone, and over 106,000 known deaths, with a large percentage of those deaths contributed to the African American and Latino communities. Unemployment rates, over 21 million people unemployed as of the end of May. And then, of course, the millions of people around the world who are protesting brutality and social injustice in the light of recent murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery. So this is an unprecedented time, but an important time for us to have this conversation about toxic stress. So Habiba, I turn to you, and just to set up the framework for our audience, can you define toxic stress? And when we talk about it, what does it mean?
Sure. So I want to just begin by saying that over recent years, the general public has been hearing more and more this term trauma-informed, and beginning to think about how we move our institutions and our organizations toward trauma-informed practice. What feels necessary in this moment is to think about how we move our community, our entire community, into a trauma-informed way of thinking. But we have a lot of work to do around establishing a shared definition for trauma and a shared definition for trauma-informed. And we have a lot of work to do as it relates to thinking about systemic oppression and racism and anti-Blackness as part of that framework of trauma-informed practice. Toxic stress is an element of traumatization, a source of trauma for children. I'll use Harvard's definition from the Center on the Developing Child, which says that toxic stress is a response that can occur when a child or an individual, frankly, is experiencing strong, frequent, and or prolonged adversity. It includes things like physical or emotional abuse or neglect. It includes factors that can be happening for a caregiver, where they might be themselves very stressed, overwhelmed, ailing with some chronic illness, including mental health conditions, including issues of substance abuse or other physical health conditions. It includes, in terms of toxic stress, exposure to community violence, exposure to hardships within a family, within a community, or within systems. The prolonged element of toxic stress is what we worry about greatly for especially children. And that's because of the unique way that the brain is developing during pregnancy, while mom is growing that baby, in infancy, in early childhood, those preschool years, in adolescence as well, and early into adulthood. The risk factors at those different stages of development differ, but to have a chronic stressful experience during development is really damaging to the brain and to the body and the systems of the body, and have great implications for tremendous implications for the health of an individual going into the latter part of life.
Thank you. That was a great definition. So, and keeping aligned with some of the signs and what that looks like, as you get older, how do those signs of toxic stress change over time?
Mm-hmm. So the ACEs study, I think, gives us a helpful framework for thinking about how our health is impacted as a result of experiencing toxic stress during childhood, especially. And that study came out of Kaiser in California, a study that was partnered with the Center for Disease Control in the 90s. That's taken us about 20 years to kind of get our general public aware of. But in that study, more than 17,000 individuals were assessed for their experience of 10 different types of adversity in childhood and how their state of health was in their adult life. The major chronic health concerns that were assessed in those individuals were found to be more prevalent if they'd experienced one of the 10 ACEs that were part of that study. They included physical and emotional or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, include mental illness of a caregiver or someone in the household. If there's domestic violence in the household, especially that targeting mom, divorce or separation of those caregivers, those primary caregivers, substance abuse, and incarceration of a family member. I always like to give the caveat that when we look at the ACEs study, we should always remember that work was not exhaustive. It is not intended to make a determination for our lives if we've experienced those kinds of things. But in that study of really privileged and resourced people, quite frankly, it was realized that the physical, mental health, and the way in which individuals live their lives in adulthood were greatly correlated with the experience of adversity in childhood. And so some of the health conditions that were more prevalent when there was an experience of adversity in childhood were included lung disease and cardiovascular diseases like high blood pressure and heart disease, but also mental health conditions like depression, risk for some challenges such as drug abuse and alcohol abuse, promiscuity, the list goes on. So those are the risk factors that are created when there's exposure to stress in childhood. I will also say that this study did not look at societal factors like poverty, like experience of racism, discrimination, and so on.
Thank you, because that was my next question, actually. So thank you for that. So I think this would be a great segue for you, Habiba, to talk specifically about the work at Positive Education Program and how and some of your findings in the work that you do.
Mm-hmm. I am just so proud to be part of PEP, to lead PEP. Over the course of my career, PEP has invested deeply in formalizing the framework of trauma-informed care, trauma-informed education for our program, for our kids, and for our staff. I think of PEP as an organization that has the roots in the practice of trauma-informed care, work that started at the organization's founding through this framework of EYEJ, this philosophy of EYEJ that informed our founders and told those who came under the umbrella of PEP that we believe that every child can learn, regardless of the experiences that they've had, regardless of their disabilities or mental health challenges. Every child has the ability to learn through a relationship with a caring adult, an adult who is trustworthy, an adult who is well-resourced for their own well-being and care, but who's informed and educated and seeking to help children have better lives and believe in their potential. So that's the foundation from which we entered into our work as growing as a trauma-informed institutional organization. We've adopted two frameworks, two models that support our work, that add the science to the philosophy that drove our work, kind of affirmed this idea that every child can learn, that children need joy, that communities are important, that the group is where children learn best. And those frameworks are the sanctuary model, which drives 7 values that operationalize trauma-informed work, and for us, operationalize the practice and principles of EYEJ. And so those values are social responsibility, emotional intelligence, social learning, nonviolence, growth and change. We believe in this idea that we are to evolve our thinking. We believe in empowering the voice of others through democracy. And so we use these values to drive our work and to drive our thinking about the children that we serve. And then we have felt it necessary to make sure we take care of our staff and attend to their needs, so that these values are not just important to the children that we serve and to us exemplifying in their life, but we as an employer, as a practitioner of trauma-informed care, we have to make sure that we are living these values, that our staff experience them and show up in ways that model for our kids how we should treat one another. And so that has been work that we've been inspired to do by Sanctuary. From here, we've begun to deeply invest in the neurosequential model of therapeutics, which is a framework that, or a model that was developed by Dr. Bruce Perry, a well-renowned psychiatrist and practitioner of trauma-informed practice with young people and his founding of the Child Trauma Academy also founded and established this model of care that helps us think about how the brain and body are interconnected, and that by tapping into the systems of the body, the sensory experiences of the body and the individual, you can help to heal past experiences. There's not a deficit model, but a strengths-based model that aligns really beautifully with our EYEJ philosophy and gives us practices that we are able to implement with our kids and with ourselves as adults that support healing, that support wellness, and are tied to the brain and how it functions, but also how it develops.
And can you cite who conducted that study?
So the Child Trauma Academy, now the Neurosequential Model Network, established this neurosequential model of therapeutics. There's an element or a model for education as well. And they built the body of research that informs these models. And their research kind of builds on what we've learned from neuroscience, brain biology, and child development. So it's an amalgamation, really, of several sectors of teaching and learning that have come together into a single model that is supported by these metrics, these tools we use to better understand children's functioning, and how that functioning is a direct result of where the brain is in the course of development and what the impact of toxic stress, traumatic stress has been on the child's brain in that stage of development. So that the child's functioning informs our understanding of when a child has experienced difficulty, how long and intense and repetitive those experiences have been, and what we might do to support them based on what we know the brain needs during different periods of development.
Thank you. And one of this would be a great segue, because one of the things that you mentioned in terms of the pillars was around empowering the voice of others through democracy. And I think that's a great segue to mine and the work of EYEJ. So can you speak to that work and how toxic stress shows up in the youth that you're serving?
Absolutely. So just to back up, our core program is our discussion series, and due to COVID-19, we quickly pivoted to really take these discussion series online, and that program is called EYEJ, Youth Online Discussing Justice. And really what these programs are about is having discussions between adults and youth about relevant topics that they face. And so obviously toxic stress is one of the topics that we have been doing for many years. And it's a really powerful program because we've had over 450 adult volunteers from all walks of life, Cleveland Clinic doctors, returning citizens who partner together to discuss these topics with the youth. And also I think why it's powerful is not only the diversity, but we are really about engagement. We don't go in there saying we're the expert of this topic. We go in there to have a discussion, because honestly, a lot of these youth are sometimes more insightful than adults. And we talk about other topics too, conflict resolution, money, but toxic stress is obviously so relevant right now with all that's going on. These kids are experiencing already this layer of toxic stress, the extreme pressure, oppression, structural racism, and then you've got this pandemic, which is another layer, and then you have what's happening in this world right now with the murders and police brutality. So we've got to figure out positive change and support our youth. And so just to give a little bit of examples of what I've seen with 1,500 youth is that these youth are living in so much stress, but a lot of them think it is normal, right? They don't know anything different, a lot of them. And, you know, to give you an example, a kid in 24 hours could be facing, you know, domestic violence at home. They could be pressured because they are an 8th grader reading at a 3rd grade reading level and they don't want to go to school. There may be bullying going on. There may be recruitment of joining a gang, and many, many other issues just within like a 24-hour period. And this isn't just one example of one kid. This is happening to thousands of youth. And so this is why I do this work. And it's so important to care and love and spend the time with these kids. It is really all of our duty. I think another thing too that I want to state is that a lot of the youth think that what's happening in their environment and all these stresses is their fault. And so we literally go in there to say to them, this is not your fault. And I can, just as an example, I was in with a group of 7th grade boys and I literally said that to them and I literally saw their shoulders drop like a breath of fresh air. And I think also, you know, we live in such a divided country that a lot of the youth don't know, for example, that there are entities that are studying and researching this topic with brilliant expertise, and we need to do a better job of connecting and supporting each other and understanding each other. Because again, a lot of these kids don't know about the resources available. And the other problem is a lot of these kids, if they do know the resources available, they don't trust them. And I honestly understand why. I mean, look at this society now. Look at what we've done to this country. But the opportunity there is that through our discussion series in EYEJ and having these different perspectives from adults and having this engaging discussion, which is so important, kids can create their own new solutions for change. And I do want to mention that through our discussion series in EYEJ, the design of this series is really, yes, to have this discussion, but also to teach them solutions. For example, we start every single EYEJ program with a mindfulness exercise. It's a free way to teach everyone. I mean, all of us should know about mindfulness right now. We desperately need it. But to have this discussion and to embrace what is coming up in the discussion and lead them into activities so that they can really understand it on their level and teach them tools and, you know, embrace what they're saying and reflect on what they're saying as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know one theme that I'm hearing common between both of your statements is around self-care and really the importance of self-care. So we cannot stress that enough. You know, just making sure that it's not just the physical well-being, but the mental and psychological well-being of you and those that surround you. So Mallory, didn't forget about you. Let me ask you, as a member of the EYEJ Youth Council, how are you and your peers dealing with toxic stress? How does it show up in your lives, and what are some of the conversations that you're having?
So when we all first got involved in EYEJ, we were told that for our interview, we had to have one topic that we were passionate about. And the fact that we all came up with practically different topics is what is really shocking and important to know. One thing I always focused on was mental health, and then a lot of people focused on, you know, the violence they're seeing in their communities, or the things that they're seeing with their own eyes. And just recently, I helped put together that We Are EYEJ video that's on YouTube. I would tell everyone to check it out. When I first watched it, though, I was really like heartbroken by everything that everyone was saying. And unfortunately, as I kept editing it more and more, these things started to sound normal to me again. And the point of seeing these stresses as normal is what we need to break. We're starting to become desensitized to certain things. Like one of the youth council members mentioned in the video that he has a real fear of dying just by going outside. And one of the youth in the video, he said he was just in the park and somebody, put a gun under his jacket to hide it somewhere, and stuff like that. It just it's really stressful seeing everything that everyone has to deal with, and we're all trying to just come together and be there for each other.
Well, thank you for your leadership. And again, the video was extremely powerful. So I encourage everybody to check out the video on the EYEJ website. Thank you, Mallory. Just a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, please submit them now. We will be in a few moments heading to question and answer from anybody that's watching us on Facebook Live. So please be sure to put those questions in now. So with your, with the mention of the pandemic and the fear and one of your friends about going outside, and this is open to everybody, with the current pandemic, how is that stress showing up in the young people that you're working with? And how do you feel that the media coverage has intensified the stress that a lot of people are facing, youth or otherwise? And this is open to anybody.
Yeah, I want to first defer to Mallory before venturing into this space. So Mallory, if you have anything you want to offer, I welcome it before I say what I want to say.
Just with this whole pandemic that's going on, unfortunately, I feel like it has made my mental health worse. And like, it's good that my friends are staying connected. We all have our phones and our devices. Unfortunately, some people don't have that luxury. We're talking about how some people don't have internet connection. We can't even connect with one of our youth council members at the moment because he doesn't have Wi-Fi and he just can't reach us with his cell phone. And seeing how this pandemic has affected everyone I know, it's so difficult. Like we're all trying to get through it together and none of us know how.
I mean, I'll add to that. What I'm seeing from my view is that high amounts of anxiety and depression. It is very real right now. And, I don't know if you guys saw, but there was a couple different articles. I think I saw it in Cleveland.com, where the second cause of death from age 10 to 14-year-olds is suicide. And so that is all part of this. And I think also, from my view, we are a culture that teaches our youth that they can't be emotional, they can't have emotion or be vulnerable. And that is very scary. Because if you can't express yourselves in a positive way or naturally, or what your body is telling you, look what's happening, right? It's just energy that is just waiting to combust. And I think we really need to think about that and embrace it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to be mad. You have every right to feel that way. And we as adults need to acknowledge that and support that, in my opinion.
Well, let me transition to this question. How can families and educators support youth showing signs of toxic stress when they themselves may be in a position of experiencing toxic stress or having that historical legacy in their family of toxic stress?
I think that first, just giving voice to suffering. This pandemic is exacerbating a situation that was already well underway. We know that there are increasing rates of depression and anxiety and horrifyingly suicide among our youth and young adults in this country. And so our collective neglect for identifying an address to this tragedy is part of the challenge that we face now that we have a global pandemic adding weight to an already fragile situation. So I look to both self-care as a strategy, but also collective care. And if our educators and our professional practitioners come together in community with other healers and other helpers, right? You don't need a degree to be a healer or a helper. We have yoga providers who contribute to this work. We have artists, we have cultural institutions who contribute to the work of healing, supporting, and enabling healing within our community. We, of course, have our pastoral community. So how do we come together as a collective so that the adults can build ourselves up enough to come into community and embrace our youth and be the vehicle for their support and healing? So that is the issue, in my view, is adults having the will and the capacity and the resources, both emotional and psychological and intellectual and financial, to come together in community to hold up our youth. They have been suffering. They have been crying out for our compassion and our care and our intervention. And for too long, I feel the nation especially has looked to teachers to fix this issue, have looked to secondarily behavioral health providers to fix the issue. We've not appreciated the healing capacity of other institutions and organizations and helped share the knowledge that we as professionals have in those environments. But we also have not seen this as a shared responsibility. It's not just on our schools. It's not just on child serving agencies. It's not just on our social safety net systems. It's on all of us. For-profit, corporate, government, every sector has a responsibility to hold up this next generation, and we gotta deliver. It's time to deliver.
And I'll add on to that. In my opinion, the kids are not crying; they are screaming for help, like the loudest scream that you could ever hear in your life, in my opinion. And I agree with Habiba that we are a society that we are a blame and point. Look at we sit there, we blame our police, we blame we point to our youth. You solve all the problems, and it is our responsibility, starting with me, it is my responsibility, and yes, the community, and we can definitely work together to create solutions. But to Kenyatta, to answer your question, I think why EYEJ has been successful is that, number one, we have to remember that we are all human. We are all human, and going down to that ground level, not about race, not about age, not about socioeconomic background. I think we forget that a lot, and I think that's why EYEJ is successful. And I think the other reason why EYEJ is successful is that we are extremely authentic, and youth are receptive to that, because when you are authentic, you are honest, you are real, you are vulnerable, and that is the only way, in my opinion, to build trust these days, and we need to teach that for sure.
Thank you. So I think right now we're going to transition to some questions coming from the audience. So thank you, everybody who submitted your questions. Let me see. So the first one, actually, it isn't a question. It's a comment which can be addressed, and it's from Adrian Marty. And the comment is, this discussion is reminding me of research on the effects of lead poisoning in childhood development. So that's one comment that we have. Okay, we have a question from Elaine Harper. What are some first steps to take that you can help so many kids who have been experiencing toxic stress, especially over the past few months?
I I mean, I'll answer that because this is what we teach in our discussion series in YODJ. I think discussion is very important. And it doesn't have to be just with youth. I mean, I'm talking with my friends or my family from all walks of life. And I think it's very healing. And when you can have that honest discussion, you can learn to respect each other's views and see where each other is at. I think that's very powerful. In our YODJ programming, I mentioned, that the mindfulness is very important because you gotta think about this. Sometimes many of our youth they only have themselves. They may not have the means to eat. They may not have money to buy whatever. They may not have a vehicle or transportation. And sometimes, honestly, all they have is themselves. And so teaching them about positive coping skills or ways to reduce stress is so important. Little things like breathing or exercising, going for that walk, going for that run, playing basketball, listening to music. And I think a lot of times I say to people, figure out where your home is. And again, a lot of these youth may not have a home that is safe or comfortable, but home is within ourselves. So if we can figure out how to find that peace within ourselves, nothing else matters.
I am grateful for Elaine's question. I know her, and I'm grateful for her being on this call. I will say, listen. And I say that with conviction for my own self. I've been home with my own children here, and there are moments that you find yourself frustrated. The child is frustrated. Those experiences are happening across the nation, in our homes right now, and we have an opportunity to start practicing in relationship to the people who we have proximity to. Listen with compassion and without judgment. Let kids emote, let individuals express. Don't challenge the experience while you're listening. Just listen and practice mindfulness while you do it. I breathe. I try to be in the moment because we're all under stress. And what is beautiful to know is happening through EYEJ is kids are learning about the stress response system. It makes us less smart than we would otherwise be when we are stressed. It makes us less compassionate or capable of empathy. We have trouble finding the words to speak what's inside us in a way that can be received. And so for those who have, again, the will and capacity, center yourself enough to listen and receive somebody else's pain, specifically right now, our children's pain, their struggles, their frustrations, and listen without judgment.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me see. Well, it's not a question, but it is a comment from Jill Whitmarsh. She says, I don't have a question, but I wanted to mention that Ohio Guidestone has therapists and community mental health workers who are taking new clients. So she left some information in the comments section. So please, if you are looking for self-help services, please feel free, look in the comment section and find the contact info provided by Jill. Thank you for that. Let me see if there are any additional questions.
While you're looking, Kenyatta, I just want to say that even during this pandemic, mental health providers have been on the front lines. Mental health providers were deemed essential. And so organizations like mine, like Ohio Guidestone and others, they have stayed engaged in using telehealth, but also as needed in-person services. And so I echo that sentiment that if you are in trouble and you are struggling because you are alone and there isn't anyone who is either willing or able or present to listen and hear you and use that relationship to be a source of healing, then please do use 211 to identify supports that will be helpful to you as an adult or as a child or young adult it's so critical to seek that help, especially if you are reaching your fill for all that's going on. What we're enduring right now is extreme. I can't think of a time. There isn't a time in my lifetime where I've seen so much pain being borne by a community, our nation, all at one time in my lifetime. Now, this nation has a lot of history to deal with that. There has been certain suffering all through our history, but during this time, it feels so unique.
Mm-hmm. And just to echo that sentiment, I would say there are also a number of apps. One that I've heard of and people have recommended, PTSD Coach. And that was created by the Veterans Affairs National Center for PTSD. There's also Calm, which is widely used and has won a number of awards just around meditation and focusing on wellness. And the third one that I've heard of is Headspace. So definitely look online because there are numerous resources. If you can't get to a health provider, definitely look online to see if there are other resources that you can use until you can get those types of resources. So another question, do you think toxic stress is universal?
Mm-hmm. I do.
Well, it's a human response to, the stressors are variable, right? So certain communities bear different degrees of toxic stress. The stress response, the human body's response to toxic stress is a universal one. What is different is the disparate exposure to the sources of toxic stress.
I think, in my opinion, I definitely, especially the state of the world right now, these layers of toxic stress, pandemic, the murders, police brutality, I really believe that toxic stress is universal. Definitely, no questions asked.
I found a statistic recently from the American Psychological Association, and they say that Generation Z, which is anyone under 21 like myself, at more than 91% of the Generation Z members that they've got the study from experience at least one physical or mental sign of stress. And I have to say that I definitely have. I thought lump in your throat was just an expression until my recent finals week. Having to deal with the corona, stuck in my house, trying to do a photography final in my house. It was, I thought something was wrong. Every time after I ate, I felt like a weird sensation in my throat. It wasn't until 2 days after finals week officially ended that it went away.
And I'll add on to that. I mean, I have definitely experienced personally toxic stress. The difference is that I am privileged. I can go to therapy. I have positive support around me. I am safe. But, most importantly, I can breathe.
Wow. Thank you for that. And then, of course, what's next? So we've had this really powerful conversation, and based on the feedback in the comment section, I think everybody was grateful that we're having this conversation. So what's next? How do we take this conversation to the next level, and what are some tools that people should walk away from this conversation with?
I personally think, I don't want to set people up for failure. I think this work is going to be hard, but I really believe that this is an incredible time for change, and that we must embrace it. And I see the community coming together, very diverse community, and I think that really is the power of what creates solutions, in my opinion. And I just ask that we become responsible, and we realize that, we are all responsible for what's going on. But the positive is you have a voice and use it. Speak up.
I would agree. I reemphasize the importance of listening, particularly to those who are marginalized, who don't have privilege across the different aspects of self by which we might have privilege, whether it's our race or gender or socioeconomic status or educational attainment or sexual orientation. There are ways to, as Dr. Deborah Plummer states it, use privilege as a life skill. And so that feels so critical right now. Continue to do what EYEJ is doing, which is to amplify and to empower the voices of our youth. They are the change agents that we need. They are struggling and they are suffering right now in unique ways to what any of us experienced in our young adulthood. And so how do we help to bolster them so that they feel our support and are able to help change our society for the better? And I will say that it feels so critical right now that we move toward an anti-racist way of thinking, being, living, and advocating, and with great intention, breaking down the systems and structures that impede the health and well-being of our entire society. We've all heard the saying about holding a man. You can't hold a man down in a gutter without being in the gutter as well. Our health, our physical and mental health, our socioeconomic conditions, the wellness of our citizens depends on us being able to get up out of the gutter. So we need to do that together.
Mallory, I don't know if you were
Mallory, do you have any closing remarks or sentiment that you would like to share before we conclude the session?
I would just like to emphasize how much self-care is important. Like, I know that's one thing that everyone struggles with. We're always telling other people that they should be taking care of themselves when they say that they're not. We always never think about ourselves. Anything that might help you, whether it's like healing crystals, aromatherapy, meditation, nothing works. Everything does not work for everyone. So you should try what works for you and definitely just take care of yourself.
And I just want to say one more thing too. I think that we shouldn't have fear around stress, right? There's different kind of stresses, whether it's positive, tolerable, or toxic. But the opportunity here, and this is something that we teach, is harnessing that stress, that anger, that frustration, and shift the energy and turn it into something positive. And again, that can mean a million different things, whether you're using your voice, writing a blog, creating an EYEJ Youth Council, or whatever, or donating to EYEJ. But we have the power to shift and change our mindset that stress is not entirely all negative, right? We hold the power within ourselves and we can shift it into a positive change.
Great. Thank you. So we've run out of time today, and I think we could have had this conversation easily 2 hours because there were a lot of great gems discussed in this conversation. So I want to thank again Mai Moore, founder and CEO of EYEJ, Habiba Rashid Grimes, CEO of Positive Education Program, and Mallory Wilkes, a rising junior photographer and EYEJ Youth Council advisor. So thank you, ladies, so much. And thank you to everybody who participated in our first EYEJ Speaks discussion. Please follow us because we have another great one next week where we will be discussing conflict resolution. So we have another great diverse panel of speakers and a robust conversation. We would like to thank everybody for their partnership and hope that you will continue to support this amazing work. If you visit eyej.org/empower, you can make sure that you can support this work and help us by providing ongoing training and youth development programs for young people across the city. We can also help support families of youth we serve that have greatly been impacted by the pandemic. So your support is what makes this work possible, along with all of the countless volunteers who have been a part of this process. I would be remiss to close the program if I didn't mention that today is the memorial service for George Floyd in Minneapolis. And this morning, the three men arrested in the killing of Ahmaud Arbery are scheduled to appear in court today. So hopefully this conversation has empowered you and enabled you to take some resources as you're navigating through what is a difficult day for many people and has been a series of difficult days for the past several months. So to quote Habiba, we must work towards an anti-racist way of being, living, and advocating. So again, just thank you for your support. Also would like to thank my partners in crime, Tara, Jaywin, and Andre for all of your support and work in this effort. So we will see you next week at 10 a.m. discussing conflict resolution. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.